I used to think freedom was something you inherited, like a trait written in your bloodline. But I learned the hard way that in my family, freedom was something you had to steal quietly and guard like a fragile flame. My name is Elara, I am 34 years old, and for the first time in my life, I own something that is mine alone. I didn't tell my family when I bought it. Not my mother, not my father, not even my younger brother Liam. Secrets were dangerous in my household, but I had no other choice. If I had announced it, my mother would have laughed in my face and called me irresponsible. She would have reminded me that family decisions must be shared, that money should circulate in the collective. What she really meant was that everything belonged to her, including. Before I dive into my story, I want to know, where are you watching from today? And as you listen, let me know in the comments how this story makes you feel, or if you've ever experienced something similar. Your thoughts mean a lot to me, and I'd love to hear your perspective. So I kept quiet. I signed the papers in a small notary's office, the pen trembling in my hand as though I were committing a crime. And then one icy February morning, I drove up the winding road to see it, my cabin. The wooden porch sagged a little at one corner and the chimney was cracked, but to me it looked like a castle. The air smelled of pine and snow, sharp and clean, so different from the suffocating perfume my mother drenched the house with. I walked through each room slowly, running my hand along the walls, whispering promises into the silence. You're mine. I'll protect you. No one will take you from me. For the first time in years, I felt my shoulders drop, my jaw unclench. There were no eyes watching me, no footsteps outside the door, no voice telling me how I should live. Just me and the sound of the wind rushing through the trees. The first nights were strange. I would wake up at the creak of the cabin's old beams, half convinced someone was in the next room. That was how deep my mother's control had sunk into me. I carried her presence even here in my sanctuary. But slowly I began to adjust. I built small routines. Morning coffee on the porch while mist clung to the valley, evening walks down the narrow path where deer sometimes lingered. I stacked logs by the fireplace, hung curtains I chose myself, dark green like the forest outside. They were not the floral lace my mother adored, the ones she insisted made a house respectable. They were mine. For weeks I kept the cabin hidden. I told my family I was busy with work, too tired to visit. My mother complained, of course. She always did. She sent guilt-soaked messages about Sunday dinners and asked why I was avoiding my responsibilities. I ignored most of them, though guilt gnawed at me. Old habits don't die easily. But one evening as I sat reading by the fireplace, the guilt loosened. I realized no one had the right to demand every piece of me. I whispered into the flames. This is my life. This is my home. The following days were blissful. I spent hours writing in my journal, sketching the outline of a future where my choices mattered. The cabin became more than a shelter. It was proof that I could break the chains. Each nail hammered, each mug placed on a shelf was a declaration of independence. And then, it happened. It was late March. The snow was melting, streams of water carving paths down the slopes. I had gone for a long hike, letting the crisp air fill my lungs, my boots crunching against damp earth. When I returned, the sun was setting behind the ridge, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. The cabin glowed warmly in the fading light, and for a moment my chest swelled with pride. But as soon as I stepped inside, something felt off. It was subtle at first. The curtains on the east window were pulled all the way open. I never left them like that. I liked them half-drawn, softening the light. My heart stuttered. I moved into the living room, scanning the space. The rocking chair near the fireplace, my rocking chair, was angled differently, as if someone had sat there and stood up quickly. I froze, listening. The silence of the cabin pressed against my ears. I set my backpack down slowly, my pulse pounding. Maybe I had left things this way and forgotten. Maybe. But as I walked into the kitchen, the doubt hardened into dread. On the counter sat a mug. It was mine, yes, but I had washed all the dishes that morning. I remembered clearly because I had stacked them neatly to dry. The mug was out again, faint traces of tea staining the inside. Someone had been here. The realization hit me like a blow to the stomach. I staggered back against the counter, gripping the edge until my knuckles turned white. I checked the locks, still intact. The windows still latched. And yet the evidence was undeniable. My sanctuary had been breached. I sank into the chair, my thoughts spiraling. Who could it be? A stranger? A trespasser? Or my family? My mother had always bragged about knowing locksmiths, about how no lock could keep her out. She used to say it proudly, "A good mother always finds a way in." A chill raced down my spine. I could almost hear her voice echoing in the walls of my cabin. I stood trembling and whispered to myself, "No. Not here. Not this place." But the certainty was already unraveling. The one thing I thought was untouchable was slipping through my fingers. I didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. The night after I realized someone had stepped into my sanctuary, I barely slept. Every creak was an intruder, every gust of wind a warning. At 3 a.m. I got out of bed and did something I used to do as a child when I wanted to know if my mother had snooped in my room. I set quiet traps. A single pine needle balanced on the inside latch of the back door. A thin white thread taped across the low cabinet that hid my paperwork. A book placed at a very specific angle on the arm of the rocking chair. Petty perhaps, but it steadied me. If anything moved I would know. The morning light spilled pale and cold across the porch. I brewed tea trying to taste its calm. By noon I had almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything. The mug, the curtains, the chair, maybe I'd been careless. Maybe freedom had made me forgetful. I drove down to the little mountain town for groceries. At the general store the cashier, Paige, freckled and friendly, smiled wide. "Your mother was in earlier," she said. "She's so proud you bought a place up here. Said she loves the idea of a family cabin." My hand stilled on the counter. "My mother," I repeated. "Lovely woman, very organized. She asked about the best weekend to bring people by, said she's planning a tour before summer." Paige's tone was pure sunshine. Mine was thunder. I managed a nod, paid, and walked out so fast the bell above the door shrieked. On the drive back, the trees on either side of the road looked suddenly like spectators, all of them leaning in to watch me understand what I didn't want to grasp. She knew. He had always found a way to know. How? In my mind, puzzle pieces snapped into place with a click that hurt. A week after closing, a county tax notice had been misrouted to my old apartment, an address my mother still had a key for in case of emergencies. She must have seen the envelope, opened it, followed the thread. A locksmith here, a favor there. She had bragged my whole life that no lock deterred a determined mother. I felt foolish for not anticipating the obvious. Control finds the crack and pours itself in. When I pulled into my drive, the cabin door wasn't just unlocked. It was open. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I stepped inside and smelled lemon cleaner, the exact scent my mother kept under every sink we ever owned. My thread on the cabinet was snapped, dangling like a cut nerve. The pine needle had fallen to the floor. The book's angle was wrong. And then I heard voices. Not from the kitchen. From my bedroom. Something in me went very still, like the lake in winter when its surface hardens to glass. I walked down the short hall and stopped at my doorway. My mother stood by my dresser, opening and closing drawers with the absent-minded authority of a person who believes she cannot trespass in what is hers. Two women I didn't recognize hovered behind her, neighbors from town or friends from her social circle, their eyes bright with curiosity. My quilt, my new soft forest green quilt, was folded back as though the room were staged for viewing. "Oh," my mother exclaimed when she turned and saw me. She didn't startle. She smiled. "There you are, darling. Look at this lovely nook." She tapped the dresser. "I told them you have taste. This will be perfect for family holiday visits. So much potential." "Get out," I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears. Low level, not at all the panicked shout I expected. The two women tittered, embarrassed, as if I'd interrupted a rehearsal. My mother, unfazed, waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be dramatic, Elara. We're just taking a look. You know Cousin Mara's boys will love the loft. And imagine Easter brunch on that porch. Get out." The words shook now, not with fear but with fury. "You broke in." "I had a key made," she corrected as if she were giving me the right verb tense. "It's not breaking in when it's family. Everything we have, we share. You grew up in this family. You know how we do things. Secrets," she added sweetly, "are the beginning of rot." I stepped forward. "This is my home. Not a family hotel. Not a community center. Mine." The women glanced at each other, alarm rippling through their smiles. My mother's expression cooled, the way wind slides over ice. "Don't talk to me like I'm the enemy," she said softly. You bought a cabin with money that could have strengthened the family. The least you can do is open it, let us feel included. You will feel included too if you stop this isolation fantasy. I stared at her, at the lemon sheen on my dresser, at the small lace doily she'd pulled from her tote and placed dead center like a flag claiming land. Leave the doily, I said. Everything you brought leaves with you. Elara, she said, my name a pitying sigh, don't be ungrateful. We're on your side. And I am on mine. I replied. We stood like that, a small silent hurricane filling the space between us. Somewhere outside, a gust rattled the pines. The two women retreated down the hall, murmur apologies fluttering in their wake. My mother didn't move. Keys, I said. What? Give me whatever you had made. Her jaw tightened. Don't be absurd. It was a stalemate and we both knew who usually won these. For 34 years she'd leaned on my doubt until it bent. But the cabin gave me something 1,000 arguments never had. A door frame to brace myself in, boards beneath my feet that would not rearrange themselves to please her. I was done bending. I'm calling a locksmith, I said. Right now. She laughed then, high and delicate as if I'd told a joke at a luncheon. You think a lock is a boundary? Sweetheart, I am your mother. I am not outside your life. You are when you walk into my bedroom without my permission, I said and pulled out my phone. Leave or I call the sheriff. The word sheriff put a fissure in her poise. She stepped back, eyes darting toward the window, toward the porch where the world could see Looky-Loose escorted out by a deputy. Pride is a very public thing. She lifted her handbag and smoothed the strap. We're going, she announced to no one in particular. Then to me, lower your voice. You sound common. I didn't lower my voice. Out. She paused in the doorway and glanced around as if cataloging what she would eventually rearrange. This is a phase, she said so quietly only I could hear. You'll come to your senses. Family is forever. Locks are temporary. They left. The lemon smell lingered like a verdict. I closed the door and pressed my forehead against it, the cool wood grounding me. My hands shook then steadied. I gathered the doily, the water glasses they'd used without asking, the faintly damp towel someone had laid on the back of a chair as if they lived here. I put everything on the porch. I opened the windows, let the wild air in and watched the last light slide off the ridge. The group chat on my phone pinged before dusk. Elara, what's this about you being rude to your mother? From an aunt I hadn't seen in months. We're worried about you from a cousin who had happily taken over my childhood room the year I moved out. My mother's message arrived last. We love you and want to be part of your life. If you close doors you'll only make yourself lonely. Lonely. I walked to the fireplace and watched the first flames catch. Loneliness was not what I felt. What I felt was a shape forming, a spine unfolding, a person standing up where a shadow used to be. At 7:10 p.m. I called the locksmith. Tonight, I said when he offered an appointment for the next day. Please. He arrived at 9, a polite man who did not look around my home as if it belonged to him. He did not comment on the view. He did not suggest where I might place a buffet table for Easter brunch. He set down a small tool bag and asked one question. Deadbolt too? Yes, I said. Both doors. New keys. All of it. The drill word, a sound like the unthreading of a story that had been written in my name without my consent. Shavings of metal curled onto the floor like commas, like pauses between a life I was told to live and a life I was choosing. When he tested the new bolt, it slid with a clean, certain click that sounded to me like a vow. He handed me the keys, 3 of them matte and plain. I held them the way I'd once held talismans as a girl, convinced they could keep nightmares away. This time the talisman was real. When he left, the night had deepened. I stood on the porch and listened to the forest. The dry rattle of branches, the muted rush of the creek below, the far-off call of something wild. I breathed. I went inside. I locked the door. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, a new voicemail. I didn't want to hear it. I pressed play anyway. My mother's voice filled the room, low and honeyed. Elara, darling. I understand you're upset. You can change locks if that makes you feel safe. But you and I both know safety isn't in hardware. It's in family. We'll come by Sunday with everyone and I'm sure we can talk like adults. Don't embarrass yourself by turning us away. There was a smile tucked inside her words. The kind people wear when they are certain of the ending. I put the phone down face first, walked to the door and checked the new bolt again just to hear that click. Calm final mine. Then I turned off the lights and sat by the window, watching the darkness thicken, listening to a new thing rising in me as steady and undeniable as the mountain itself. I wasn't sure how Sunday would go. I only knew one thing. The door would not open unless I said so. When I woke the next morning, the cabin felt both fortified and fragile at the same time. The new locks were firm, cold metal against my fingers, and yet I couldn't shake the heaviness of my mother's voicemail. She had never threatened me outright, not in words, but her tone had always carried a promise. Resistance meant exile. And exile had begun. By mid-morning my phone was buzzing with messages. My Aunt June had sent 3 paragraphs about family unity, quoting scripture I'd never heard her use before. My cousin Lily posted in the family group chat, "I don't understand why you're acting like this, Elara. Grandma is hurt. We all are." A dozen tiny voices pressed through the glass screen, stitching the same old narrative together. I was selfish, I was dramatic, I was ungrateful. Not one message asked why. Not one message asked what it had felt like to find strangers in my bedroom. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked down to the creek and sat on a moss-covered rock, letting the rush of water drown out the phone's vibrations. The mountain air wrapped itself around me, sharp and honest. Out here, the accusations didn't echo as loudly. Out here I could breathe. But when I returned home, silence settled like dust over the cabin, and the doubt began its whispering. Was I too harsh? Was I really pushing everyone away for the sake of 4 wooden walls and a patch of land? My mother's words clung. Locks are temporary. What if she was right? What if I had built a fragile fortress against something that would always seep in? That night I lay awake, staring at the beams overhead. The orange glow of the dying fire pulsed like a heartbeat. And in the glow I admitted something I had avoided for years. I was lonely. Not because I lacked people, but because I had never known what it was like to be seen without condition. My family had always loved me with strings attached. When I pulled away from the strings, the love vanished. The next day I booked an appointment with a therapist in town. Walking into her office with its soft gray walls and shelves of worn books, felt like stepping into another cabin, one built of listening. I sat down and said the words that had been building like storm clouds. My family doesn't see me as a person. They see me as an extension of themselves. And I don't know how to survive without their approval. She leaned forward, calm but firm. Elara's survival is not the same as living. You bought that cabin because a part of you is ready to live. Her words landed in me like roots gripping soil. Weeks passed. My family did exactly what I expected. They froze me out. No invitations. No updates. My mother spread her version of the story, painting me as unstable, too influenced by the modern obsession with boundaries. I became the black sheep, the cautionary tale at dinners I no longer attended. The first time I drove past my childhood home during this silent war, I saw through the kitchen window. They were all gathered, laughter spilling into the night, a scene from which I had been edited out. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went pale, tears blurring the road. For a moment I nearly turned back, nearly rang the bell, nearly begged to be let in, lock or no lock. But I didn't. I kept driving up into the hills, to the cabin that held no laughter yet, but no lies either. I started to fill the silence with small acts of ownership. I painted the living room wall a deep forest green, the same color as the curtains I'd chosen. I framed my own photographs, mist rising from the valley, the wildflowers that bloomed near the trail, and hung them where my mother once insisted family portraits should go. Every nail I hammered in was an act of defiance. Every rug I rolled out was a declaration. This space will not be claimed by anyone but me. And slowly, very slowly, strength began to replace guilt. One evening, while arranging books on the shelf, I got a call I hadn't expected. My younger brother. His voice was strained, brittle. "Elara, can I talk to you?" "Of course," I said, bracing myself for a scolding, for him to beg me to apologize. But his words spilled out like a confession. "Mom came into my apartment today. I wasn't home. She rearranged everything. My desk, my drawers. She even folded my laundry. And when I asked her why, she said she was just helping." He paused. I could hear the quiver in his breathing. It felt wrong. Violating. Like I wasn't allowed to have a door that shut. I closed my eyes. A wave of recognition surged through me, bitter and validating all at once. "How you know," I whispered. "I thought you were exaggerating," he admitted. "But you're not. You're right. She doesn't respect boundaries at all." Something shifted then. For years it had been me against them. But now a crack had formed in the wall. Liam had stepped through. We talked for hours that night. About childhood. About how Mom had opened our diaries, intercepted our mail, just to protect us. About how Dad had stood silently by, calling it love. About the way we had both learned to keep secrets not because we wanted to, but because we needed to. When the call ended, I sat in the rocking chair, staring into the fire. For the first time since the invasion, I didn't feel completely alone. My cabin wasn't just my refuge anymore. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that the lines I drew weren't selfish fantasies but necessary walls. The fallout from my stand was real. My family had cast me out. But in the ashes, something was beginning to grow. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It was truth. And truth, I realized, could be its own kind of home. When Liam called me again the following week, his voice carried the weight of someone who had finally stopped making excuses. "Elara, I can't do this anymore," he said. "Every time I push back, Mom finds a way to twist it. Yesterday she told me she had a right to my apartment key because she paid for my college. Can you be?" I sat by the cabin window, the evening light painting long shadows across the wooden floor. For years I had longed for someone in my family to understand, and now Liam. "She doesn't see us as separate people," I said quietly. "She sees us as extensions of her control. If we resist, we're betraying her story of what family should be." The word landed heavily. I had spent weeks in therapy learning the difference between walls and boundaries, between exile and self-respect. But mediation? Sitting in a room with my mother, asking her to hear me while a stranger watched? Terrified me. And yet something inside me stirred. A recognition that the cabin, as safe as it was, couldn't remain just a fortress. If I wanted real change, not just survival but something healthier for the future, I had to risk the confrontation. "You'd do that?" I asked. "You'd sit in that room with me?" "Yes," Liam said without hesitation. "Because I don't want to end up locked out of my own life like you were. And because you were right. All along." I felt my throat tighten, my eyes sting. For years, I had carried the burden of being the difficult child, the one who drew invisible lines no one respected. Now I wasn't standing alone. That night, I lit a fire and let it burn low, thinking of the years I had wasted trying to make myself small enough to fit the family mold. The cabin walls seemed to breathe with me, steady and strong. When I finally closed my eyes, one thought pulsed clear and undeniable. The reckoning was coming. And this time I wouldn't face it alone. The week before mediation moved like slow weather across the ridge. Sun one moment, thin sleet the next. I chopped wood, scrubbed the counters, made soup I barely tasted. In therapy, I rehearsed sentences that began with "I" instead of "you." I felt unsafe when you entered my bedroom. I need privacy to be respected. It sounded simple in that quiet office, the way a trail map looks easy until you're knee-deep in snow. Liam came up to the cabin the night before. He brought store-bought pastries and a determination that looked new on him, like a jacket he had finally decided to wear his own way. We sat on the floor with mugs steaming in our hands and went over a short list I'd written on a note card titled "House Rules." No keys in anyone's possession but mine. No unannounced visits, ever. No family tours, no lending, no claiming shared ownership. If a boundary is crossed, there will be consequences, police if necessary. Contact must be direct and honest, not via group chat verdicts. Liam read it, then read it again, nodding slowly. "It's clear," he said. "It's fair. It's the first time our family has seen rules that protect us instead of the story." We slept poorly. At dawn, the mountain peeled itself out of fog, the creek throwing off silver in the first light. I drank coffee on the porch and watched my breath ghost into the air. If fear had a sound, it would have been the scrape in my chest. If hope had a scent, it would have been pine. The mediator's office sat on the edge of town, in a low building with generous windows and plants that looked alive rather than decorative. Her name was Ms. Navarro, small and steady, with a face that invited people to try telling the truth. She shook our hands and spoke in a tone that made the rules sound like planks across a ravine. Clear, dependable, necessary. "When one person speaks," she said, "the others listen. No interruptions. We are here to understand impact before we discuss intention. And we commit together to leaving with agreements you all can keep. My mother arrived on the hour with her coat draped over her shoulders like a cape, my father a step behind her, his eyes on the carpet. The scent followed her in. Lemon and something floral that seemed to insist the room be tidier, brighter, more acceptable. Her kiss stopped short of my cheek. "Darling," she said, a silk ribbon tied around a blade. "Thank you for agreeing to this." I felt my shoulders brace. Liam's hand found my elbow. Just a touch, a reminder that I was not walking into the room alone. We sat. Ms. Navarro looked at me. "Elara, why don't you begin since you requested this meeting?" I had rehearsed an opening a dozen times. None of those sentences showed up. What arrived instead was the picture that had burned into me the day everything broke. My curtain drawn all the way, the wrong angle of the rocking chair, the lemon sheen on my dresser. I told that story. Not as an indictment but as an experience. "When I realized you had been inside," I said to my mother, my voice steady and soft at once, "I felt like my lungs forgot how to work. I had built a place that finally belonged to me and it no longer felt safe. I need you to understand that it wasn't a misunderstanding or a decorating choice. It was a violation." My mother crossed one leg over the other. "You're making this dramatic." I was preparing it to be welcoming for family. Ms. Navarro raised a hand, gentle but firm. "We'll get to intention. Let's stay with impact a little longer. What did it do to you, Elara, beyond the moment?" "It made me small again," I said. "It told me that no matter what I build, you will walk in and rearrange it. And I am done being rearranged." Silence stretched. I felt the scratch of the chair fabric under my palms, an anchor. Liam cleared his throat. He turned toward our mother and his voice shook but did not break. "She did the same to me, Mom. You came into my place when I wasn't home. You folded my clothes, opened my drawers. You called it helping, but it told me the same thing. It told me I don't get to be a person with a door that means anything." The surprise that crossed my mother's face was genuine and quick, like sun between clouds. She looked from him to me as if deciding which of us had betrayed the script more. "I am your mother," she said finally, as if that were a credential that overrode reality. "I have always protected you. You don't know the dangers in the world. You don't know what it takes to keep a family intact." My father shifted, the chair squeaking. He hadn't spoken in months of conflict, not directly. Now he did, his voice thin but audible. "We went too far," he said, and even that small we sent a shock through the room. He swallowed. "I should have stopped it." "I didn't." My mother turned to him, startled, the script unraveling further. "You're siding against your own wife?" "I'm siding with our children's right to adore," he said. The sentence sounded like it had taken him years to form. Ms. Navarro nodded once, a tiny green light. She looked at my mother. "You love your children. I don't doubt that. But love without respect is not safety. It's proximity. Can you reflect what you've heard about impact without defending your choices?" My mother pressed her lips together. "Pride is a very public thing, contrition private." "You felt unsafe," she said to me, each word extracted like a tooth. "You felt," she faltered, then found it, "violated." "And I felt like my life is an annex to yours," I added quietly. "Not mine." Her gaze fell to the note card in my lap, the one labeled House Rules. A muscle worked in her jaw. "What do you want?" she asked, but the way she said it was not a question. It was the old test, how much, how dare you. I laid the card on the table and read the 5 lines. My voice didn't wobble. "I will not debate these. This is not punishment. This is how relationship continues with me." She gave a tight, incredulous laugh. "Police? You would call police on your mother? If you come into my home without my permission again?" I said, "Yes." The room held its breath. Ms. Navarro didn't fill the silence. She let it work. When my mother spoke, the ribbon was gone from around the blade. "You're asking me to become a stranger," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm asking you to become trustworthy." Something in her face, something brittle I had always mistaken for authority, cracked. She looked older, suddenly tired. "I grew up in a house where doors meant secrets. Secrets meant danger. I swore my children would never have doors I didn't open." She inhaled, shaky. "I told myself it was love. And what did it cost us?" Liam asked very softly. She closed her eyes. It cost you your mother when you needed her to be anything other than a guard. We sat a long time with that. Ms. Navarro slid a simple form across the table. Let's put your agreements in writing, she said. Not to legalize them, though you could, but to honor them. She looked at my mother. Returning keys is a gesture, not a defeat. My mother reached into her handbag. A small ring of duplicates, the metal glinting like an admission, appeared in her palm. She set it down. The sound it made on the table was barely there, but I felt it in my chest. Then slowly she took off her own house key from her chain, the one I hadn't known she wore, and placed it beside the ring. All of them, she said, voice. We wrote. We signed. Liam signed as a witness. My father signed too, a hand finally doing the thing his mouth had failed to for a year. Before we left, my mother reached for me. Not to clutch or steer. Simply to touch the back of my hand with the tips of her fingers. It was not an apology, words would have to do that later. It was something like an opening. I don't know how to be this mother, she whispered. But I will try. Trying is a beginning, I said. We walked out into a day that had decided on sun. The air tasted like thaw. Liam let out a breath I hadn't realized he'd been holding and laughed, the sound startled and young. We hugged in the parking lot, awkward and real. Back at the cabin, the porch knew my weight again. I brewed coffee and carried it outside. A hawk cut a clean arc over the valley. The creek kept talking to itself. Inside, the new deadbolt waited, quiet and loyal. I turned it once, not out of fear but simple habit, and listened for the click. It still satisfied me, the way a period satisfies a sentence that has finally been allowed to end. The phone buzzed. A message from my mother. May I visit sometime next month? If not, I understand. Not a demand. Not a schedule she had written for me. Question with room for my no. I set the phone down and watched the steam rise from my mug. Locks, I realized, were never the point. They were just symbols that helped me find the true boundary I had been missing. My voice choosing when to open and when to stay closed. When the sun slipped behind the ridge, the cabin gathered the light and made it softer. My home held steady. I stood in the doorway a long time, hand on the frame, feeling the grain of the wood, the place where a person becomes a house and a house becomes a promise. I had bought a mountain cabin to get away. I kept it to come back to myself. And now, when I opened the door, it would be because I said yes.